I was going to do this long breakdown of how we got here from January 6th to the ICE era. But the video just never came. I couldn't do it. I decided to pull back the curtain to really look at the man, to see what I was missing. And this is what I came up with.
Redhead receipts, auditors, let's audit!
Auditors. A lot of people feel unsettled watching Donald Trump right now. He seems scattered, reactive, unfocused. One moment it's grievance, the next it's vengeance. Then another pivot, and another target. It's enough to give you whiplash. It doesn't feel strategic, it feels unstable. And for many people, that instability is frightening. Not because it's loud, but because it doesn't feel anchored. If that's how it feels to you, trust me, you're not imagining it. I feel it too. But what is the problem isn't that there's no plan. What if the problem is that the plan for Trump was never really about governing in the first place? Because the story doesn't begin on January 6th. It begins much earlier, with grievance, entitlement, and retaliation, slowly replacing his purpose over time. Barack Obama didn't just lead. After leaving office, he was seen as well-liked, charming, calm, grounded, just at ease with himself. His presidency visibly aged him, the weight of the office always does, but afterward, he didn't harden. He didn't dwell. He didn't become someone else. There's a steadiness there, a kind of internal coherence that doesn't rely on constant affirmation. That contrast is intolerable because it reflects an image Trump believes he embodies. And for a time before the presidency, some did believe it. During the apprentice years, the charming, powerful masquerade worked. The image was tightly managed. The edits did the heavy lifting. Obama's post-presidency presence wasn't produced. It didn't need control. It didn't need constant reinforcement. And that's the part Trump can't access or replicate. The appeal doesn't come from dominance or branding. It comes from not carrying resentment, not needing approval, not governing from grievance. The Affordable Care Act itself was never meant to be permanent. Obama said that openly. It was a stopgap, a bridge, until Congress could act. But it wasn't treated that way. Not reform, erasure of Obama's presidents. Privately, Obama likely hoped a stronger, more durable plan would replace it. What followed wasn't that. Trump acted in haste, and in true Trump fashion, there was no real backup plan because there never needed to be one. It was never about health care for the people. It was about eliminating the association with Obama, undoing his achievement, punishing his legacy. The absence of a replacement wasn't a failure of planning. It revealed the intent. Symbols don't get debated. They get targeted. Obama wasn't the only symbol that triggered this pattern. There's another legacy that exists almost entirely outside Trump's reach. The Kennedy name. The Kennedy legacy doesn't rely on branding. It doesn't require constant reinforcement. It actually grows after power ends. It's posthumous. And that matters because respect that strengthens over time, without participation, without control, is something Trump can't access, and he definitely cannot understand. He seeks recognition in real time, applause, loyalty, naming rights. The Kennedy legacy doesn't ask for any of that. It exists whether anyone approves of it or not. And that's why what followed wasn't admiration. It was total degradation. Trump put the spotlight exactly where it would tarnish that posthumous reputation and image, not on the myth, but on the fracture. Choosing RFK Jr. for the role where he is most controversial, and it would stand out where his views are most extreme and his conspiracy theory thinking most visible. That says a lot. That choice wasn't accidental. Placing a legacy holder with a publicly documented complicated history front and center, it wasn't about governance or expertise. It was about association, about dragging a revered name into chaos. And RFK Jr. signed right up for that, about reframing a legacy through its most vulnerable representative. But he didn't stop there. When he couldn't erase the Kennedy legacy, he inserted himself into it by controlling the institution that bears its name, by attaching his own name alongside it, by forcing association where reverence once stood. That wasn't organic support, it was control. So he reached for it while he was still here, not posthumous. He has to see it, by force, by association, and by demolition. And this is where the pattern becomes existential. Courts and the Department of Justice aren't just obstacles, they're threats, because they already caught him once. Felonies, convictions, exposure, and he wasn't going to let that happen again. From that point forward, accountability itself became the enemy. Courts weren't neutral. Investigators weren't independent. Judges weren't arbiters. They were dangers. Evidence stopped being evidence. It became a setup. Law stopped being law. It became retaliation. What followed wasn't reform. It was prevention, to make sure no one ever gets close enough to see him, his misdeeds, clearly again. And this is where the pattern turns inward. It's always, why me? The textbook narcissistic victim mentality. That question plays incessantly in his brain with no answer and no understanding. Courts aren't neutral. Investigators aren't independent. Trump is in constant worry that someone might really see him. Rules aren't rules, they're weapons. Accountability gets reframed as persecution. Evidence becomes bias. Oversight becomes a witch hunt. It's not innocence being asserted, it's resentment being rehearsed. And once that framing takes hold, every institution becomes suspect, and retaliation must happen even without validation. And that's where insulation comes in, because attacking the system from the outside wasn't enough. He needed protection from the inside. The Department of Justice isn't supposed to be loyal to a president. It's supposed to be loyal to the United States. But loyalty became the requirement. So he placed people who had already represented him, defended him, advised him, attorneys with a pre-existing duty of loyalty. And once that happens, prosecution can't move forward, because you cannot investigate someone you are ethically bound to protect. You cannot bring charges where a conflict of interest has been deliberately created. So accountability wasn't just resisted. It was structurally blocked, not by rewriting the law, but by rewriting who enforces it. That's how insulation works. You don't have to defeat the justice system if you can occupy it. And this is where the fear becomes concrete, because Epstein was not incidental, and he wasn't partisan. He was close. For years, Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein moved in the same social and financial circles. Not briefly, not accidentally, they socialized. They appeared together repeatedly. They shared environments, including Trump's own properties. They said it themselves. They were best of friends for like 10 years. Trump's spa wasn't just a business, it was access. Both men understood that modeling agencies created pipelines. Young women, aspirational entry points, blurred boundaries. Epstein exploited that world, but so did Trump. But Trump took it up a notch. He bought the Miss Teen USA pageant. And it wasn't just branding, it was proximity taken further, control taken further. He won up. And that matters. Because when Epstein was finally arrested the second time, when there was no deal, no quiet exit, no way to buy his way out like Florida, the threat wasn't just scandal. It was documentation. Who knew whom? Who introduced whom? Who shared space? Who benefited from silence? That's why Epstein was never about ideology. He was about records. He was about videos. He had cameras in every room. Files don't respond to bluster. Timelines don't disappear with spin. Associations don't vanish just because you shout louder. Trump campaigned on releasing the Epstein files. Transparency, sunlight. But once in a position to do so, the posture changed. Distraction followed. Attempts to redirect attention toward Bill and Hillary Clinton. Figures whose reputations had already absorbed public damage. That wasn't exposure, it was just deflection. Then came denial. Claims that it all was a hoax, or that it was exclusively Democrats. I'm sorry, I don't mean to laugh at that. But it's an argument, given that Trump himself was a Democrat. So I guess that's a little bit of transparency, isn't it? Because he was a Democrat during that time. He tells on himself every time he says that. You know, at times he was registered as an independent, but back then he was a Democrat. That framing wasn't about truth. It was about narrowing the blast radius. But if he wants to claim he's a transparent president, there it is. It was the Democrats. He represented a network, and networks are dangerous to people who can't survive scrutiny, which brings us back to insulation. Because there is no scenario where someone with that level of proximity allows independent prosecutors or investigators to operate freely. That's why loyalty became the filter, why personal attorneys ended up running the Department of Justice, why people whose careers depended on protecting him were placed in positions meant to protect the public, why independence became intolerable, and why instability wasn't a flaw. It was a feature. Cash, a walking catastrophe, doesn't threaten you if the catastrophe is directional. I need a coat. Oh, what threatens you is someone steady, independent, unimpressed. Once exposure becomes the risk, control becomes the objective. And that's the through line. Epstein explains the fear, insulation explains the response, and retaliation explains what followed. And there's a reason why Ghislaine is in a prison that she shouldn't be in. Let's just all put it there. She should not be in it. That's it. Another little insulation. And this is where money enters the picture. Not ideology, not loyalty, money. Because proximity isn't just social, it's financial. Trump's rise has always depended on access to capital, to influence, to people who could open doors when others closed. Money creates insulation. foreign investments, luxury properties, membership clubs, naming rights. These aren't just business models, they're leverage points. They create dependency, silence, obligation. And when money and power overlap, accountability becomes optional. That's why transparency is so threatening. Because financial records don't argue back. They don't get distracted. They don't care about loyalty. They just sit there, wait to be read. Sounds like the Epstein files too, doesn't it? Which explains the obsession with control, with loyalty, with retaliation. Because once money, power, and proximity intersect, exposure isn't political, it's existential. And when recognition didn't come, he didn't recalibrate. He created a substitute, a board of peace, with $1 billion buy-in. That detail matters, because peace doesn't usually require an entry fee. Credibility doesn't ask for a wire transfer. And let's step back and look at who bought in, and look at who didn't. It doesn't match the language being used to sell it, or the title. That wasn't global consensus. It was transactional validation. It came together fast, on the fly, after world leaders made it pretty clear they weren't impressed with him. After speeches landed flat, after moments that were meant to elevate him only reversed how out of step he was. So he built his own room, his own stage, his own audience. Not because it worked, but because he needed to see it work. Because when the world won't confer legitimacy, he manufactures it. That's the pattern. When recognition is denied, new structures appear, funded, branded, and loyal, right? Not to peace, not to outcome, but to his own reassurance. The Nobel Peace Prize didn't go to Trump. He really wanted it. He went to a Venezuelan opposition leader, a woman, recognized internationally for a democratic win. After U.S. forces captured Maduro, she met with Trump, not as a confirmed successor, but during a deliberately unresolved transition. She later offered him her Nobel Medal. Not the prize itself, but that's not transferable, but the symbol of it. Many believed it was a final move, a chess move, that recognition might be returned, that legitimacy would be restored. But that didn't happen. The medal stayed with him. Power did not move back to her. And what followed didn't look like stabilization. It looked like leverage. Venezuela wasn't treated as a nation in transition. It was treated as an asset. Oil became the focus. Control became the objective. And when questions were raised about where that money was going, today's hearing gave us an answer, or rather a stumble. Marco Rubio was asked directly whether Venezuelan oil revenue would be handed over if the United States now controls Venezuela's oil operations, and he couldn't answer cleanly. And what he ultimately acknowledged in a stumbling manner was that the full amount would not be transferred. That matters, because this isn't an isolated foreign policy choice. It's part of the same worldview. When Norway didn't give him the Nobel Peace Prize he believed he deserved, Greenland entered the conversation, not diplomatically, transactionally. Not as a nation, but something to be bought, leveraged, or punished. Something to say to Denmark, you didn't give it to me. Now I'm giving it to you. Denmark said no, and retaliation followed. Not formally, but unmistakably. Recognition denied doesn't disappear in this framework. It gets converted into pressure, into control, and into ownership. And this is where retaliation stops being symbolic and becomes physical. At first, the threat was the National Guard. That was a posture. Military presence is intimidation. But that just wasn't flexible enough. It was too visible, too many constraints, too many guardrails. So the strategy shifted, and ICE was transformed. No longer just a small department of immigration enforcement, but a federalized force, 75 billion, deployed aggressively, selectively, and politically. Not everywhere. Targeted. Democratic states, sanctuary cities, places that resisted him. This wasn't about border security. It was about punishment, because ICE could move where the Guard couldn't. Act without governor's consent. Operate with ambiguity. Blur the line between law enforcement and intimidation. And that ambiguity was the point. What began as grievance ended as enforcement, retaliation, wearing a badge, and it didn't stop there. In 2025 alone, at least 32 people died. Yes, you heard me, died, while in ICE custody, the highest number in decades. That's not abstract policy. That's real human cost. And, as we know, in early 2026, U.S. citizens Renee Nicole Good and Alex Preddy were fatally shot by federal immigration agents in Minneapolis during very aggressive enforcement operations, let's say. But you know what? That body count isn't isolated either. That's when the tone changed. The aggression went too far. The backlash grew. Lives were lost. And suddenly, the rhetoric shifted. Backtracking. Reframing. Quiet changes in posture. Not because the policy changed, but because the consequences became visible. Cities responded. Communities rallied. Legal challenges followed. And ICE itself issued internal guidance to pull back. That matters, because when retaliation turns lethal, it stops being governance. It becomes exposure. This wasn't law and order, it was grievance backed by force. And once that line is crossed, there's no confusion left about the plan. It was never chaos, it was escalation. And Trump is starting to backtrack on this one big time. We all know Bavino is gone. He's out now for what happened. But the other two, Kristi Noem and Stephen Miller, are in hot seats right now because they're blaming one another for rhetoric, for things that the president's upset about. Oh, and I'm so here for this. I even did a song. As soon as I clocked Levitt turning around and pivoting, saying that Trump needed more information and wasn't backing Miller, oh, I was ahead of the curve. I put together a song that said, "Bye-bye Miller, bye-bye Noem." Just look for it. Classic Trump pivot, bye-bye. That's the name of the song. Well, it's not a song, but it's, yeah, you'll find it.